Hello everyone! In this week's video, I'm revamping my art style. Long time no see, I'm back from my break. It feels good to be back. I feel rejuvenated and ready to take on new projects. So during the latter part of 2023, I was starting to feel dissatisfied with my art style. I wanted to do some art studies and maybe try to work on my style a bit, but I didn't really have the time to do so. However, I did have the time to do so while on my break. I hadn't planned to film the process or make it a video. However, as I was doing these studies, I thought you all might find it interesting or that maybe it would help some of you. So yeah, now it's a video. Anyways, let's jump into the process of revamping my style. So to start, I wanted to have an art piece that I could compare to. I wanted this piece to be a kind of generic representation of my current style. It's going to be a simple picture of a girl in 3/4 view, and her hair will be slightly moving with a soft breeze kind of look. Now I know I'm calling this video New Year, New Art Style, but that's mostly just because it's catchy. Don't worry, I'm not completely changing my art style. I do still like my style overall. I was just feeling dissatisfied with some of the ways I was drawing things. The first one is the hair. I've been noticing that I've been kind of oversimplifying hair in a lot of my works. And this isn't really a bad thing, it's just I noticed I used to draw more details in hair, but more recently I started to simplify them a good amount. And I think this happened because I do draw less detailed hair for my webcomic, and that's on purpose because it saves time. However, the stylistic choice for my webcomic started to seep into my illustrative style as well. Which makes sense because a lot of times I'm drawing a lot more from my webcomic than I am making illustrations. So it kind of makes sense that my webcomic stylistic choices would start to seep into my illustrative choices. So the first thing I want to work on is drawing more detailed feeling hair. The second thing I wanted to work on was how I render eyes. I don't really mind how I render eyes, it's nice, but I was starting to feel bored of it. I also felt like I could make them look more detailed and shiny. So that was something I wanted to try to study. Also, I wanted to say that I don't totally love this picture. I don't feel like it's a perfect representation of my skill set, but I do feel like it works at showing what my general style looks like. Also, the relation of the head, neck, and torso feels a bit off and it bothers me, but I felt too lazy to fix it. I was slightly rushing this picture and I finished it within like 2 hours or so, and I did it all in one sitting. So yeah, there's little things that are off about it that I don't really like. But now it is finished, so we'll be able to compare to it later. And now let's start doing some studies. Now you might be wondering how I'm going to go about doing these studies. My first focus was doing hair studies. So I looked for artists that drew hair in a way that I liked. I then placed the different pictures next to each other and questioned what these pictures had in common, and wondered if I could find any details that were similar between them all. By identifying things that I liked, I was able to find what I want to incorporate in my style. The first thing I noticed is that my hair needs more variation. I tend to draw the same hair strand pattern, kind of like these. They are kind of embedded into my muscle memory, if that makes any sense. So I kind of just do them without thinking. So to help add more variation, I looked at other people's work and I tried to find different hair strand combinations that I can use for a hair I draw. Let's go through some of my favorites. I liked it when artists would have strands curve in front of other strands. It helps the hair feel less confined to the flow. I also like when strands turn to show the other side, almost like a ribbon. Also, I'm going to be keeping this page and am taking notes for me to refer to later in the future. That way I can have something to refer to as a refresher of things that I learned. Another thing I learned is that I really like having hair strands loop behind other hair strands. It gives a very soft look to the hair. I also need to be better about allowing strands that break the flow. I have a tendency to make all of the hair kind of flow in the same way, but having some strands be different can make things feel more lively. Another small thing I noticed is that I sometimes have a tendency to make the hair split around the same height, but I liked it when artists had variation in this, like the splits were at different levels. So I'm going to try to include that as well. Oh, and lastly, I like when the hair kind of splits and shows the more inner depth of the hair. I feel like there's a better way to describe this, but I hope that makes sense. Now that I have different strand patterns I can refer to, I wanted to try drawing a hairstyle. But first, another thing I've learned I want to include in my hair drawings is layers. Now when I draw hair, I think of it as being split kind of like this. the front, middle, back, and underside. When I was studying other artists, I noticed they would split hair in this kind of way too, but it's like they would also add another layer of hair on top of the under layer. And this top layer would often have some kind of shorter bits or would flow away to let the under layer shine through. I saw this done a lot, especially for shorter bob style kind of cuts, since it's kind of easier to see the layers with those. So yeah, I need to not only think of the hair as sections, but also having an upper and inner layer. Now I'm sketching out a hairstyle while making sure to follow my hair strand guide. I am also taking notes on my drawing for future me to refer to later. Even as I'm recording this voiceover for this video, I'm remembering things I learned. So future me can also watch this video if needed. For the second hairstyle, I wanted to try to draw a shorter cut. I decided to draw a hairstyle similar to Brayson's hairstyle. He has a very generic hairstyle that I'm familiar with, so I thought it'd be good to experiment with. Once again, I am making sure to think about the different kind of hair strand patterns, and I'm trying to include more variation. I think a big part about these hair studies is that they are forcing me to think about what I am doing, instead of falling into my usual shapes, patterns, and what my muscle memory knows. It's forcing me to break some of my habits and to actually think about what I'm doing. And I think that's good. It's kind of the whole purpose of this practice. It's pushing me out of my comfort zone and forcing me to do things a bit differently. So for hair, I was mostly wanting to focus on how I draw it, but I did also want to work on my rendering of it a bit. So I enlarged my sketch of the shorter hairstyle and went in with line art. We'll kind of speed through this since it's just line art. And I didn't really change it up at all. Brayson's hair is black, but I decided to make this hair be brown because brown sounded like a nice simpler color to shade. It's a good mid-ground of not too dark and not too light, so I can apply the things I do here to many different colors. I noticed that I liked rendering styles that used more cell shading, and I wanted to try to do that too. So I started by adding some shading that defined the strands and different sections of the hair. I also added a subtle dark gradient and some skin tone color around the face to help the hair feel softer and less harsh. Next I start going in with some hard edged highlights, and I was drawing out some different kind of shapes for the highlights. I had them kind of break up into new shapes for each strand area and would draw long lines on edges of where the hair strands break into their own shapes. I feel like this is sounding like a tutorial, which you can treat this as one if you like, but I'm just trying to explain the process. Since I'm still very much learning here. Now if I wanted something on the more simple side, I feel like I could have stopped here, but you know me, I have to be extra with my rendering. So I add a soft yellow gradient set to add glow, and then I erase the gradient wherever I felt like the hair strands were separating. This helped to further define the shape of the hair. I add a light blue gradient for bounce light, and added a warm soft glow to the hair that I erased lines into to make it feel more detailed. I lowered the opacity of this layer and added different colors to it to make it more fun. I tweaked some small things like the line art color, and to help add more form, I added a shadow along the bottom of the hair that I erased into to make it have some form that follows the shape of the hair. That is the nice part about drawing the more detailed hair, is that I felt it was easier to shade its form because it was better defined and had more sections for me to work with. Compared to sometimes I found the more simple hair to be hard to shade because it wasn't defined as much. So yeah, it was kind of easier going into more detail for the shading since the detail for the hair was drawn out. And so here's the finished hair. And I have to say, I am very happy with it. It definitely feels more detailed, and I really like how the rendering turned out. Now that I've made some progress on the hair, let's go over to the eyes. Like how I did for the hair, I found artists that drew eyes in a way that I liked, and made note of things that they had in common so I could find what I wanted to include in my eyes. I wrote down all of the things I wanted, and you can see them here, but I'll talk about them more in a little bit. Sometimes when I draw eyes on their own without a face, the proportions will end up being kind of different. So to help the eye be the same proportion, I just stole the line art from the picture I drew earlier. Now, usually I would talk about the process for this eye. However, I ended up not liking it. It had the different elements I wanted in a way, but just not in the way that I liked. So yeah, I'm not going to bother explaining the process, but as we are going through this footage, I will talk about the details I want to include in the new eye rendering style. I want more cell shading, a rim around the iris, more highlight colors, bounce light, a circle of detail within the iris itself, and more details on the eyelashes. Now you can look at this eye and see that I was trying to include these details. It has more cell shading than usual, has a darker rim around the iris, and so on. I even tried to make the eyelash area more detailed, but I just didn't feel happy with this result. And this is okay. I'm experimenting, and the whole point of experimenting is to, well, experiment. So let's try again. I'm going to copy this first eye and draw over it to keep the proportions the same. And you might be thinking I could have just copied the same line art again. However, for this eye, I wanted to try to change up the line art for it a bit. After I rendered the first eye, I did some more studying of artist work to see if maybe there were some things that I missed that I wanted. One thing I noticed is that I liked when eyelashes had a bit of a texture to them. They had a kinda sketchy look to them and weren't totally solid. I liked the softer feeling that this adds, so I tried to include that sketchier feeling into my line work. I also noticed that I kind of liked when the irises felt like a more naturally drawn oval shape, instead of being a perfect oval made with a circle tool, so I tried to draw the shape of it by hand. I also made the line art thinner than I usually do for the iris. Now we're on to the coloring. I made this eye purple because I felt like it. I started by adding the pupil, and I was going to add some soft shading, but opted for a hard edge shadow instead. I add a bit of a darker color with a soft edge, and extend this color around the rim of the iris. To help the rim feel less harsh, I add some lighter colors to it. I do a bit of tweaking to the shapes and blend down that cell shading I added earlier down into the center of the iris. I draw in a few dots and also erase into the curve to add details to the iris. I noticed I liked it when the details pointed towards the pupil, so I'm going to try to have all of the lines point towards the pupil. I did a combination of erasing and blending to create these shapes. Next was adding some spots of Add Glow. I usually only add one, but tried adding multiple this time. I also saw an artist that outlined these Add Glow shapes, and I thought I'd give that a try. It does help them stand out a bit. I'm a little on the fence about it, but I think I like it. Next was the highlights. I tried to add more than I usually do and also tried to include more colors. In this case, I used white, purple, and blue. Like with the other details, I try to have many of these point towards the pupil. I noticed that I liked when chromatic abrasion was added to the highlights. I felt like it really helps them pop, so I added some to mine. I do this using an auto action I downloaded from the Clip Studio Paint asset library, because adding chromatic abrasion on your own can be kind of a hassle. Now I add the white of the eyes and its shadow. This wasn't too different from my norm, but I did add some warmer colors that I felt like were a nice touch. I added a bounce light that will come back too, and the top of the eye felt a little too empty, so I repeated that shape I drew in the bottom half in the upper half. And we can't forget about the eyelashes. This time, instead of adding more line details, I added some warm gradients to the edges and lower lash line, and then I added some purple highlights to the lash area and erased them into a shape that feels like it kind of expresses the form of the eyelash. I hope this is making sense. And I guess it doesn't get shown in the footage, but I made one edge of the bounce light soft and erased some lines into it to suggest the eyelashes are breaking up the shape with cast shadow. I also wrote a bunch of notes to my future self. The notes are a little overwhelming, but also helpful. So here's my finished eye study. I do feel like the second attempt captures more of what I want compared to the first. But now let's put all of this into action by redrawing the picture I drew at the start of this video. Now I want to start by saying that for this drawing, I am trying to redraw the first one. I was also trying to not really look at the first one. Also, just because I didn't want to draw basically the same exact thing again, I turned the character the other way to make it feel different. But also, remember how I mentioned I felt like the relation between the head, neck, and torso was a bit off in the first one? I also kind of fixed that here. So yeah, I feel like this one is going to turn out looking a bit better just because it's the second version and I know things I want to fix. But I do find it interesting that I only did one sketch for this drawing. I did two for the first one, but I probably only needed to do one for this time around because I had a good idea of what I was drawing already. Also, I wanted to try to spend about the same amount of time on this piece to make the drawings easier to compare. I don't want to compare something I spent 2 hours on to something I spent like 8 hours on. I did spend a little bit longer on this picture, but not too much. It was maybe only like 30 or 40 minutes more. Oh, and I do apologize that this character ends up looking a little bit older. For some reason, I thought the character in the first one seemed to look like maybe a bit of an older teen. But after I finished this picture, I went back and looked and she didn't really. She kind of just looked like she was in her mid-teens. So yeah, long story short, apologies that they do look kind of different, but I'm trying to make them comparable. Like I said previously, I wasn't planning to make this a video, and that's why I was working on this during my break. But as I started jumping into the process of doing these studies, I thought maybe it could be a video. Plus, it allowed me to come back a week earlier than anticipated, so that's nice. Speaking of my break, it was very good. My husband and I planned to go on a trip during my break, so my husband had time off. However, things did not work out, so we just had a staycation instead. We still had a lot of fun though. My husband had been wanting to show me the Hobbit movies and the Lord of the Ring movies. However, they're all very long movies, so we often don't have time to watch them. However, this was a perfect opportunity to go through them. So we ended up watching all 6 movies over the course of my break, and overall, I did enjoy the movies, and I really appreciate the world building and the different characters. However, they were violent and kind of intense and also kind of gross at times. So I had to close my eyes a lot, but I did still like them, and a lot of them made me cry. Plus, I now understand a lot of my husband's quotes now because he quotes the movies a good amount. Also, while on break, my husband and I went to Olive Garden. I had never been to one before, so my husband thought it'd be fun to go to. The breadsticks were very yummy, and I got their chicken Alfredo, and it was also really good. The plate was huge and had so much food. I didn't even get close to eating it all, but we took the rest home for leftovers, and I had it for dinner like the next day, so it was good. I got 2 meals out of it. But I also tried some of my husband's food, like he got the toasted ravioli, and they were so yummy. I'm totally getting that next time we go. They're really good. Oh, I also started playing Fae Farm. I had gotten it as a Christmas gift, but was waiting to play it since I wanted to finish Winds of Anthos first. And I did finish it, so I started playing Fae Farm, but I was a bit nervous to start playing it. I had heard some mixed reviews about it, but so far I'm really loving it. It is very cute. I love how you can decorate your farm and your house, and the different activities like mining and fishing are also really fun and well done. Also, you don't lose stamina when you walk or run, so that's fantastic. I'm looking at you, Winds of Anthos. Yeah, I feel like this game feels a little bit better because I played Winds of Anthos, which don't get me wrong, I loved Winds of Anthos and had a ton of fun playing it. But some of the mechanics just like are kind of odd, and like the mining was kind of okay. But because I played Winds of Anthos, I think Fae Farm is seeming even better because like some of the mechanics are just kind of more well done, I think. And plus you can decorate and stuff, and I love decorating, and you couldn't do much of that in Winds of Anthos. I would say the kind of letdown for the game so far is the characters and villagers. I don't know, I just don't really care about a lot of them, and I kind of ignore them. There are a few NPCs I talk to, but not many. So yeah, I'm not super interested in the characters, and that feels like a little bit of a letdown. But I do really enjoy the world and the different mechanics. It's really fun and cute, and I put a lot of hours into it over my break, and we'll probably play it later tonight. Or I'll beat Mario RPG. I've also been playing that, and I'm super close to beating it, I think. But anyways, enough of my rambling, back to the art. I am shading the hair, and I have to say I do like how the hair turned out. However, I like my first attempt with the brown hair a bit more. I kind of played around with the different techniques of doing things, like I applied the highlights in a different way. Instead of drawing them in, I added a band of soft color and erased the shape into it. But I feel like I'm not as happy with the result. So yeah, I know I am making this picture to kind of show the result of my studies, but I will still be playing around with things a bit. That being said, I do feel like these studies were overall successful, especially for the hair portion of it. Even when I'm drawing in my sketchbook or doing some personal art, I feel like the hair I draw looks more detailed, like in this picture here. Also, this is a picture I drew while on break. It is of Chip and Silva. It kind of just started as a doodle of Silva, but then it evolved into this piece. But yeah, you can see that her hair is more detailed, and I also applied some of the eye details from my eye studies to her eyes. even though I always draw Silva's eyes in a kind of different manner. I also drew this illustration because I have a goal for 2024, and that is to make a finished illustration each month that is just for me. I'm not allowed to film the process or make a video on it. And to be honest, it was really weird drawing a finished picture and not having it be for a video. Throughout the whole process, I kept doing my usual YouTuber habits, like I would try to think about what I would say for a certain part of the process, but then I would remind myself that it's not for a video, or I would check to make sure my screen recorder was going, even though I was never filming the process in the first place. It made me realize that I have kind of forgotten how to draw just for myself. So yeah, that's why I have this goal of drawing a personal illustration each month. That way, by the end of this year, I have 12 pieces that I made that are my own personal works. Besides that, I don't have too much else for art goals. I do want to finish my sketchbook. Oh, and I'm also trying to be better about posting my art to social media, like Instagram and Twitter, or I mean X. Twitter is a better name in my opinion. I'm always really bad about posting my art online, but it is fun to share it and give feedback and show it to people, so I'm trying to be better about doing that. And so now both pieces are done, and we can now compare them. Here's the first picture that basically represents my usual way of drawing things. And here's the new version after doing some studies. Like I said, I feel like this one turned out a bit better just because it was the second attempt, and I could fix some things that were off about the first one. But I do feel like this new way of drawing hair and eyes also adds to it. And sorry the character doesn't look exactly the same. Like I said, I was trying to not look at the first picture so it wouldn't influence me. But anyways, I feel like this time of practicing and studying was very helpful, and I am pleased with the result, and I'm excited to continue to play around with this way of drawing hair and shading eyes. I will continue to further refine them in my future works and try to apply the things I learned here to those. Before we end, I want to say a big thank you to my wonderful YouTube members and Patreon patrons for their support. It means so much to me. And thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you all next week in my next video. Bye!